will be actually global. So what I wanted to tell you and to share with you today is, well, something that I've always been curious about, that is to say BIOS. So we all use computers, mobile phones. However, I've always noticed that BIOS was kind of a mystery. When you kind of turn on the computer, it seems that your BIOS is working, but sometimes later on we don't know what the BIOS was doing. I studied here in Madrid, and there was an IT support team in the residence where we were staying. And well, whenever we had to do something with the computers, we had to reset the password of BIOS, whenever we had to change the date, etc. So to me, it was always kind of a mystery, as I say. So that little love that we had for BIOS during the 90s, and I'm sure, well, not only in the 90s, but also in recent years, we have all worked with BIOS to add hard work. So I've always noticed, I've always felt that that part was a bit special. I've always was willing to see how far we could go with BIOS. Actually, when we were on MS2, we were already doing things with BIO with a bit of a destructive character, but then I've seen that governments have tools for BIOS infection, so that aroused my curiosity again. And then in my talk, you will see that on top of all the slides, you see the address of a survey that you are very likely to answer online. It is about BIOS topics, and I'd like to know whether how much you've worked with it, how much you played around with it, just to find out what is the actual or the current use that we make of BIOS. So I'm sure that you can remember bad BIOS. So Dragos to you, the organizer of the Canada conference, started to say that his computer was doing something wrong, that it looked like if it was infected, that he had to, well, despite reinstalling OS, he continued to be infected. He said that, well, that the different devices, his different Mac devices, got like kind of infected through ultrasounds, etc. But then in the beginning, well, he was kind of fooled. People said that he was a bit crazy, that that was not possible. Then he could see the dumps in the hard disk, etc. Nothing was apparently wrong. But then when Snowden showed up, then we got the ANT catalog, which is a very interesting catalog for the tools used, in this case, by the US government for attacks. So where we could see specific tools to infect BIOS. So this man, he no longer looked like he was lost, but actually we could see that, well, there were tools, BIOS attacking tools, and no one had researched on that before. So now we have like two tools used by the NSA. So if you notice the date, that is 2008. Ever since then, there were tools to infect and to stay on BIOS. At the time, it was against HP and Dell servers. These names have been used widely recently, but however, there were other names around to infect Juniper routers, which is FreeSD with a ordinary BIOS for a PC, and also other devices that were launched, well, that was evidence last year as the result of the publication of the ANT catalog. And also very interesting when another Snowden document was leaked. So here we could see projects that were intended to be carried out, this for innovation. So if we notice the last paragraph, they were very much interested in doing projects for firmware. You may remember the Kaspersky report launched by Kaspersky 2 weeks ago when he talked about infection of firmware. So NSA, same as other governments, have worked on that for many years. They had firmware infections, BIOS, firmware, the infection, so low-level things that were not being given too much attention. And then here we see destructive projects such as Bonfire. They wanted to do kind of a sabotage. They wanted to delete the BIOS so that our computer becomes a brick, or specific with Wi-Fi modules where the idea was to obtain information from the system and then to upload these DiFi modules. Or also this BERSEC, which is a very interesting module. As we will see during the presentation, the objective of infecting BIOS is eventually infecting the OS through process injection or through master boot record infection. So anything that would allow us to execute commands or to, well, to eventually infect the OS. So they had two initiatives. One was persistence in Linux. You may notice that in the second paragraph they were saying that if you had Linux, well, you couldn't be infected. So this is good because we know that we have to use Linux if you don't want to get infected. And then also information about Windows OS and how all these infections could be injected into that. So when I saw that and I said, oh, this is extremely interesting, this safety community has been kind of asleep. And actually, well, in the end, had not been actually sleep. But anyway, I wanted to see how far we could get in terms of BIOS infection. So when we talked about infections, we tried to talk, or we often talked about infections at the user's level. We were talking about creating malware that was later executed. Others were in drivers. They needed an extension in Mac. They needed a kernel module in Linux that would allow us to go into the OS. These, well, most of the research in the past 20 or 25 years was conducted over the Ring 3 layer. That's where all these systems or user level applications are being executed. However, there are other layers where code can be hosted. We have Ring 2. Current OS do not use that. OS 2 used to use that Ring 2 for entries and exits. So Ring 1 is not very much used either. Current OS use either Ring 3 or Ring 0. But if we use emulators or virtualizers, this layer 1 is used. So I'm referring to Intel here, but as I say, these rings are not being used. So then we have the kernel ring where we have the module systems, extensions for Mac, where we have access to everything. If we reach the kernel, we will have full access. However, there are other rings that I would like to discuss in this presentation. We have the -1 ring, where we have all the extensions of Intel or AMD that allow us to go virtual. So that is to say, this is a place where we can host ourselves or from we can do infections. We have another layer, which is the -1.5. It is a bootkit. It has evolved a lot from the viruses that infected the soft disks in MS2, or floppy disks in MS2. And then we have the -2 ring, which is kind of a execution mode for processors, which is SMM. And in the transferences, or we could see that it was used. It was the Achilles tendon. All the attacks had to do with MSS when we talked about BIOS. And then we have -3 ring, which is the actual BIOS. Here we are talking about full infection of the BIOS and execution of ROMs, where we have malicious infections that eventually go into the OS. This is the most interesting part. And last, we have an additional ring, which is -3 ring, where we have some plates that have their own chipsets. These are mini operating systems, and are often used whenever our device stops working. We have like a mini server where we can log on remotely to see what happened, whether the memory has been broken down, etc. Intel has this kind of rings more and more. These are for kind of remote help, for remote support, and they are being used to host malware as well. So now we will focus on the typical ones. We will forget about -ring or ring 0 and let us deep dive into the rest of the rings. And for that, the best thing is to start talking about what BIOS is about, what is it for. I'm sure that you have all gone, well, worked on a motherboard, you have removed the battery to reset the BIOS values, you have added RAM, etc. At the end of the day, BIOS is often a ROM, then back in the 90s changed to flash. And well, here values are stored whenever the computer is turned off. Well, in the past MS2, you had, well, every time you turn it off, you have to enter the date. And then the next version started to store all that information in a ROM so that you didn't have to enter every time you logged in. So here we're talking about hardware, disk, interruptions, etc. This all very well explained in a series from AMC. Name is Halt and Catch Fire. There is a good frame, a good scene, which I very much like. Okay, see if I can play it for you, where we can clearly see what they did when they tried to clone the first IBM BIOS, which was a milestone in history. Mm,
Personal computer, like any other computer, is just a nothing box full of electronic switches and hardware. You know, the IBM, the Altair, the Apple II, it's all the same junk. Anyone can buy all this stuff off the shelf right now. It's open architecture. I mean, IBM, they basically don't own anything inside the machine. Except the chip. Except what's on the chip. The BIOS is on one of these chips, we just don't know which one. The ROM BIOS is the only part of the machine IBM actually designed. It is the program, it is the magic. Bad news is they copyrighted it and they don't know how it works. Good news is there's a way around that, sort of. Reverse engineering. Right, grab me the oscilloscope and a pen and paper. We need to record these pin voltages. I'm a little rusty at this. Yeah. +5? Yeah. 0? Mm-hmm. 0. Mm-hmm. +5? Yeah. 0. Mm-hmm. +5? No. 0. Yeah. +5? 0. Yep. -5? Yeah. Yeah. 0? Yeah. -5? Yeah. 0. Yeah. +5? Write these numbers down. 2800-1316-0456.
Wait. What am I doing here?
We're writing down the contents of the addresses, right? So each group of 4 lights represents a hex digit.
I understand hexadecimal code. How are you getting this from that?
This first line, that's a B. 2 on, 1 off, 1 on. Okay, second line here, E. 3 on, 1 off.
Oh, I get it.
1 on.
How many of these addresses do we need to transcribe?
65,536.
Right, as we can see, the story tells us that something similar happened. Phoenix Technology was a company that when IBM launched this first computer, it was the first personal computer that was quite successful. It was the first IBM PC that was back in 1981. So in 1983, this Phoenix company didn't do any personal computer, but bought one at Walmart. At that time, I don't know whether it was a garage or not. They did reverse engineering. They looked for the ROM, because actually the IBM PC used tools and pieces that were free. You could buy them anywhere. And the proprietary part of IBM was only for the BIOS and for BASIC. So they had to find the ROM. Then they need to get the information out of it, and for them to create a ROM BIOS that was compatible with IBM, that would allow them to create clones that were compatible with the IBM PC. This was highly controversial because IBM called all lawyers, and they were reported, they were sued for that. But at the time, they had two teams in Phoenix, and the person that did the reverse engineering could not talk to the other team. Those who did reverse engineering wrote down in the specifications as to what the BIOS was supposed to do, and then the other team took all these specifications and coded all these specifications to create a new BIOS. So they kind of saved themselves in this legal battle with IBM, and from there onwards, all the clone PCs came to the market. And at the time, there were many new companies appeared, companies such as Amy, AWOR, and I'm sure well that most of the BIOS that we have nowadays are made by Amy, Phoenix, etc. So this was a very interesting story, and this is what happened with BIOS in terms of the evolution. When the first CPM OS was mentioned, they started to talk about BIOS. They said that it was a one way of, if you remember, if you developed in MS2, we used the BIOS interruption to write on the disk, to access to the keyboard, to the graphics, and all that allowed us to extract the hardware that was underlying. And then back in the 80s, when the first BIOS started to show up, then the BIOS at the time continued to evolve. There were only a few changes. The only thing they did was to support new and new hardware. Disks started to become larger and larger. Then they also included, started to support cards. But then Intel, back in the 80s, got a bit tired and they started to create the EFI. It was a property of Intel, but then the international community of manufacturers of hardware and BIOS said that, okay, but we need to have a common standard, and that's how UEFI started, which was a kind of association with a number of promoter members. So also interesting, in 1999, an open source BIOS was created. Now the name of it is Coreboot. Actually, all the Chromeboot that are sold nowadays use this open source BIOS. It is not from Amy or Phoenix or IBM. And then in 2013, we also had Libre Boot. Libre Boot. So the open source BIOS that was created in 1999 has some proprietary modules. However, the 2013 version is fully free, is fully open source. So on the screen you can read the number of members. So traditional BIOS are similar to what we can see on the screen now. You've seen that thousands of times. So this is what you got with older PC. This is an old BIOS. You all know it. And now our BIOS are more and more interesting. They include graphics. There are several options available. And also because of the modular character of Wi-Fi, you can upload as many modules. So we have shifted from legacy BIOS to Wi-Fi systems. But there are differences between the systems. So this is a BIOS BIOS. So in old BIOS, the process is buying all the hardware. It seems that all devices are working correctly. And then, well, the third module starts to upload kind of a mini BIOS with many modules. And then whenever the main BIOS is uploaded, then it calls for the uploading of new codes, and that's where the infection could be appear. We are talking about the infection that more likely than not appear in this mini BIOS. So in the Wi-Fi system, it's very similar. However, security is higher from the code that is executed right from the beginning up until the BIOS is uploaded. So in this first setup phase, where the hardware is checked, well, everything is checked, like CPU, memory, controllers. But the point 8, which is the interesting one looks for devices with its own ROMs because it will also execute the code that the devices will have. It would also gives you access to the MBR, to the booting system. And why do we want to analyze BIOS? Well, primarily because it is difficult to detect. I don't know whether you check out your BIOS to find out whether they are infected or not. As far as I know, only few do that. Only those who are paranoid. Uh, because I want to check out whether they're having any changes or not. But actually, there are no security tools to analyze BIOS. Actually, the only manufacturer that was doing something like that was Kaspersky. He had kind of a antivirus for BIOS, but didn't never reach the market. So no one has been concerned about or took care of BIOS and BIOS security. But I'll show you many examples where you will see that BIOS can be infected, both the old ones as well as the new ones.
While the NSA would not name the country behind it, cybersecurity experts briefed on the operation told us it was China. Deborah Plunkett directs cyber defense for the NSA and for the first time discusses the agency's role in discovering the plot.
One of our analysts actually saw that the nation state had the intention to develop and to deliver, to actually use this capability to destroy computers.
To destroy computers.
To destroy computers. So the BIOS is a basic input-output system. It's like the foundational component firmware of a computer. You start your computer up, the BIOS kicks in, it activates hardware, it activates the operating system, it turns on the computer.
This is the BIOS system which starts most computers. The attack would have been disguised as a request for a software update. If the user agreed, the virus would have infected the computer. So this basically would have gone into the system that starts up the computer, runs the systems, tells it what to do.
That's right.
And basically turned it into a cinder block.
A brick.
And after that, there wouldn't be much you could do with that computer.
That's right. Think about the impact of that across the entire globe. It could literally take down the U.S. economy.
I don't mean to be flip about this, but it has a kind of a little Dr. Evil quality to it, that I'm going to develop a program that can destroy every computer in the world. It sounds almost unbelievable.
Don't be fooled. There are absolutely nation states who have the capability and the intentions to do just that.
Based on what you learned here at NSA, would it have worked?
We believe it would have, yes.
Is this anything that's been talked about publicly before?
No, not to this extent. This is the first time.
This is an interesting video because this was before the AND catalog was evidenced, okay? So it is the first time that NSA speaks about this topic publicly. It was highly controversial in the US because many people said that, well, complained, or they are just making it up. But actually, well, we know how interesting BIOS is. So looking at the history of BIOS infection, it started in 1994 when we have an email from the American Army. Apparently, there were BIOS that had been manipulated in a Korea factory, and every 13th of November, the Happy Birthday track was being played. Every time you start up a computer on the 13th of November, well, Happy Birthday was sung. Okay, it was not that much malicious, but we should not forget about the implant stations of NSA, and well, also whenever these devices are transported from the factory to the destination, they can also be altered or changed. Then in 1998, well, there was another CMOS there. It showed a very ugly image, such as this one. Whenever we got infected, this is what we got on the screen. It was interesting because if you press Ctrl Alt Del to reset your PC, then the hard disk was deleted. Then in 1998, So the problem that we had is that we had full access to the BIOS area, and then any user process could write on that. Then Chernobyl showed up, appeared. It was a virus that activated itself at the time of at the date of the disaster of Chernobyl. It was created by a Taiwan person. At the end of the day, he became kind of a national hero. He said, "Okay, I'm ready to, I know how to create a virus that no one will detect." So the novelty was here about the dissemination. So remember at the time when we bought magazines, they had a CD with them. So many of the CDs that you got with your magazine were infected. So the Wing Commander manufacturer got infected, and everyone who bought the Wing Commander or a version of it got infected. So it overwrite it on the part where the BIOS was, and then also on the hard disk. So therefore, the system was completely broken. Then there were some variations. It changed the date on Christmas date. Then you had to put a password on the BIOS, and then it was the first time that it was a clear malicious use of Windows system, and then trying. Well, it was sabotage, various sabotage.
For this purpose, manufacturers react in such a way somebody wants to attack our BIOS, so let's create a dual BIOS. If the initial BIOS is corrupted, so we will start out from the second dual BIOS. So there was Chernobyl versions which infected dual versions. So manufacturers decided to create the fourth and quart BIOS. So in the very first falls, they kept it, and then on a CD, on a hard disk, they created a full 4SAM kind of BIOS. The very interesting thing you can see now, when Windows 1995 is infected, on screen, do you remember the blue screen? Okay. We can't do anything. We can't do anything because our PC is totally dead. BIOS is blocked. It's impossible that Windows 1995 could work this way on YouTube. So there's somebody taking all MSS viruses and put it back there. Let's move on to 2007. ISO.org and Symbian. So two Chinese students created concrete versions anti-infection. Very dangerous things. These two Chinese students infected all kind of BIOS for every manufacturer and BIOS version. They created specific infecting versions of BIOS. Many of the disinfections from 2007 to 2011, they attacked the SMM part. They install IS BIOS ROM device. When you started up the computer, they joined the ISA BIOS malicious BIOS and inject it onto the Windows operating system. It started up at the very same time. In 2009, legacy infection from BIOS. Anibal Saka gave us a talk regarding infections and events for certain versions of Phoenix and Award. They were able to infect it. They need to refresh the BIOS with a new one, which required having physical access to the machine. The most interesting thing here is that BIOS is compressed. The BIOS code is compressed minus the decompression routine, which cannot be compressed, otherwise we won't be able to execute it. So in the compression area is applied, and from then infected the operating systems, starting up the machines. One test against OpenSM, and in the other one they injected a binary in the Windows systems XP. Let's move on to 2011. During the research with Trojan and malware found with different names, according to Membroni manufacturer, it was originated in China by having one of these two antiviruses installed. Otherwise, you won't be infected. Later versions, you were infected anyway. It was based upon in the previous version from 2007. Here, Mebroni checked the BIOS version. If it's a Word manufacturer, it looks for the port SMA, and SMM area is the executional mode of CPU. Copy the disks, refresh it, and reboot it by infecting the master boot record and then infected the operating system, reboot it again. Here, the code where you can check if the version took the whole memory where the BIOS was by identifying that the manufacturer was Word, a Word. If it's not Word, there's no infection. Here, let's move on to 2014. Black Energy 2, different antivirus versions. Black Energy, I gave you a talk about distribution with Black Journey. It was pivoting, and there are more oriented modules to the address and directed attacks. Last year, it was discovered there was a specific module where information about the BIOS resided in order to identify versions to infect or uniquely identify another things. There's always software using the tricks you had mentioned before, CompuTrace 2005. Some of your equipment use it when your computer is stolen. CompuTrace uses an option ROM in a BIOS device when the BIOS boots apps is installed on Windows or install a process or is joined to a process. By reinstalling the operating system, it's going to be there always with us. By reinstalling the system, no matter what you do, since it's executed in the very first beginning of the PC, it will be infecting the operating system once again. Here is this is a valid software used by companies with the very same trick. By those who infect BIOS, is always executed whatever the operating system is. Operation modes. We talk about SMMs. Here, operation modes of CPU x86. Very first MS-DOS or versions 3 of Windows, we have the real mode and we have the protective mode, another compatible with MS-DOS and the new versions and releases. We have the opportunity of executing the x64. There is the SMS, which is it's in between. SMM is in between. As system management mode is a specific CPU management and executable mode when there are low-level events, when the ventilator stops working, and regarding the proper health of what is connected to. For instance, there is a power outage, independent or regardless of the operating system. It's a specific execution mode with a memory mapping. When you are installed there, it gives you access to all the memory of the device, and then you can move on to all the devices installed on this machine. All the attacks in the very beginning over the last years tried to get into this executional booted reserve area. All the attacks we saw before, many researchers on this Congress, there had been three main researching groups: an American group in Littre, a French group for the Interior Minister of France, and there's also people from Westcar and his team working on this. There are the three main public teams working on SMM, system management mode. We can see on screen many attacks and failures. The objective is always the same: to inject or infect the privileged area of this code, and then can infect it and inject it on the operating system memory and affect processes. When we do this, we lose everything because executed on RAM. If we can infect the BIOS, the other devices, this will be booted when the computer is started up. We also got Advanced Configuration and Power Interfaces Researchers, the ACPI. This was not very successful because the manufacturers put on many measures. How can you infect the CPI control and all these temperature events? We turn off the computer, and there was a way of trying to infecting certain tables in order to inject them in the operating system. The manufacturers, Intel and other manufacturers, stopped working doing this because it was not an easy road, an easy way. Then move on to the PCI expansion ROM. This is the very first IPC computer from IBM with the interpreter at basics. As commented, these were available on graph cards, network cards. All the actions are directed. Examples from 2007, the very same researcher doing on CPI so that we can keep code permanently inside that would be start out whenever we start up the code because we access the operating system below or underneath. Arrigo Trucci researching and trying how to infect network cards and plates with a little processing capacity. Then he infected graphic interfaces and plates and cards by entering different modules and infecting the various equipments. Many attacks on Apple devices in 2012. There was an attack when a Thunderbolt devices from a network card, the Ethernet adapter. Apple didn't check or verify certain things, and we could execute code and infect the operating system. Last year, a very advanced attack was done when we discovered certain Apple's failures. They infected an option ROM. They were capable of adding cryptographic keys to check what part of the UEFI from Apple was executed at the startup, and we could execute it before the startup by stealing the password, as you can see on the picture. Apple didn't use the UEFI normal system. It has a proprietary release version from UEFI, which did not meet the standard. It's very easy to infect Apple and to record Apple's password by a Thunderbolt adapter from internet by using this specific code. In the UEFI case, there was a lot of attacks to the Achilles ankles. When we update our UEFIs or BIOS, we need to rewrite this part generally by checking cryptographically, by recording that everything is written correctly. But there were so many attacks, as you can see on screen, where we skip this thing. Firstly, in 2009, all was kept in UEFI minus MP file. It was the image of software introduced to turn up when we started the computer. What who and add discovered a failure when bypassing MVP, and they could execute code. The MVP was not signed. They introduced a malicious MVP, executing everything. Many failures, butterflies. They use the utilization process. In fact, this year, a public exploit appear of what you can see on the last line. There is an easy way of exploiting a vulnerability in UEFI regarding SMM. When we turn down the computer, UEFI keeps certain parameters from the system. Today it's easy to inject this ourselves on that area. When we reboot the computer, it will inject the infected malicious code we put it on. So only the equipments from as of January of 2015 are free from this. Now let's move on to a very short video regarding a UEFI infection. Now on the screen for you guys. BIOS on screen. Let's see if we can access it. In this very case, with an interflow failure or vulnerability at the moment of updating the BIOS, we start up a Windows 7 operating system. Let's see how can we execute the exploit trying to load a UEFI module, and then we will see how everything is uploaded and the system. Windows starts up. I will execute the update of UEFI modified for making workflow and adding the UEFI version I like the most. Now it's executed. We reinitialize. This is the reinitialization of the system, and the whole part of the BIOS is changed. We control the whole part of the BIOS by making the most of this BIOS interflow. By checking all the researches done over the last 15 years, there's been a gap, a temporary gap. There's a catalog from 2008 until 2013 where many of these researchers we should have given their findings. Many governments, the French government, the US government working on this, I guess that for them to obtain exploration new ways of infection, this should be very interesting. From 2008 to 2013, there had been so few informations about virus attacks, but there's information about the UEFIs. There are so many capacities and vulnerabilities we can check on UEFIs. Let's move on to the next level. Virtualization, many ways of trying to affecting the hypervisors to execute the code we want to. General Waska researchers work and other researchers work on the very same thing. There were so many things of trying to maliciously attack the BIOS to execute commands. This would be the phase in a -1 level. There had been so many attempts to sequester and hijack the boot app, the startup. Let's pay attention to the normal boot process in a normal PC. There is a moment where the BIOS is booted up. We check on the next system, the bootloader, which is the operating system, to execute the operating system. There have been many Trojans, viruses, MS-DOS in the boot up system. They're also used today. It's more difficult to try to execute code there. With UEFI is the same applies. The latest Trojans and tools applied precisely on this square area on skin, when you can sequester this part and inject there whatever you want to. This is a timeline of all the bootkits, except for MS-DOS. There were so many there. The latest bootkits from 2005, the very first bootkit executed until today, where you can get more advanced bootkits classified regarding the way they infect. They infect the master boot record, and they try to inject themselves on the operating system. Many BIOS infections infected the master boot record, and then the operating system is an important and interesting part as to getting this infected. You can take it out from the secure boot. With Windows 8, they oblige them to have secure boot. Secure boot tries to protect these boot up sequesters. Everything is assigned digitally by Microsoft. Nobody but for Microsoft can sign this. The Linux versions have a specific boot up system signed by Microsoft, and then Linux starts up. This hijacks non-operative. These have advantages and disadvantages. There have been attacks which disable the secure boot. I don't know if everybody has secure boot activated. Attacks disable this, and it again is against what we want to install. Latest Intel's releases for certain laptops, they use the Intel boot gap, which make impossible to change the BIOS, especially the open source BIOS by default is not activatable. So is signed by a public key. This is a big issue. Is this good? Is it bad? We don't know. We have problems dealing with the boot up system and other things. Secure boot is very useful because Microsoft make this forcible for everybody. Resources for today to securize our BIOS. Very few resources. We hardly have resources. There are securitization ways. They are reasonable, but they don't give us tools. So we are worried about security. 1 year ago, the anti-incidents UEFI team was created. UEFI vulnerabilities were created, and there was no response to this. So many things have changed. Mitre has released Copernicus tool. Copernicus, I don't know if you can ask them for them. I don't know if it's downloadable. From all these attacks we have commented on, present on your machine, they check and they conduct tests. You have a download of the BIOS. They analyze if they identify there is something wrong there, and chipset in Pythons. When you can interact with many parameters from the BIOS of Wi-Fi, we can check the different programs and analyze what is going on. There's another tool to discover that our UEFI or BIOS is implemented, is the RDFEU, which is very interesting to try to discover what's going on here. We don't have a base, we don't have a foundation so people proceed in different ways, and then they every time they make an app and check if there is no changes in the BIOS on the Wi-Fi. This is the only possible thing for us to do. There are not enough tools. We see that in the real life is hosting code and adding implants and to conduct directed attacks. But as of today, most of the people don't have any way of making sure that when you have bought an infected equipment, we cannot be sure that okay, we are at the hotel and the BIOS thing in our computer is infected. It's a very worrying thing. So many adversaries, but so few resources. Is there really Achilles ankle for all of you guys to bear in mind? This is it. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, dear fellow members. Should you have any questions, please raise your hands. We kindly ask your questions. Thank you. I have a question for you, my friend. Something can we do from the user layer can be read on that memory area, and we can extract a signature from it. We can do that. If we are Wi-Fi, we can get a sign of or the Wi-Fi or hash from all these modules, and to check if this is feasible. Depending on what operating system you're using, is easier or more difficult. Depending if it's on the kernel, depending on what part of the memory is installed, we can do so. But the reality is not very few people do so. So as of today, we don't have, as I said, the normal user cannot do anything. Our specific release Wi-Fi version, it was not successful. So there is not any other manufacturer creating or releasing something regarding ancient Wi-Fi's or BIOSes. The part of my question, nobody is developing an antivirus is focused on the on BIOS. What about the mobile phones? Mobile phones are different. They have a kind of a similar BIOS executed depending on the operating system, and in the very specific case of iOS, many of the jailbreaks will benefit from the vulnerabilities. They also this applies to Android as well. They don't have if I perhaps the PC where is more advanced, but the mobile phones also have trouble regarding the Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi BIOS, this layer is extracting the hardware from the very first thing at the startup of the machine. All of them are susceptible and capable of hosting some malicious code that we want to execute. Please, some questions from the audience. Kindly shoot your hands and ask. Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you very much for your very interesting talk. Very lately, I had trouble installing Debian with a version of BIOS from Toshiba. My question for you, David, people developing this kind of exploits, how can you reboot it and refine all these exploits? In the case of UEFI, the Association for Tianocord, which is the open source UEFI version, offers you the SAK, which is working on Linux, where you can create UEFI modules and regoogling them is easier to install. The version on the web is very simple, but you can install it. It's not that difficult. You can Google it. In the case of BIOS, is more difficult. Is a trial error thing. Many of these things have destroyed so many equipments. They were able to reflush the BIOS. Sometimes it was not feasible, and you destroyed the laptop onto the trash. A question downstairs, please, for our speaker. Please raise your hands. We need to see your hands. A question over here, downstairs. Hello. Thank you for your nice talk. Does it exist, or there had been some analysis when you do the dump of BIOS, the malicious program tries to protect itself? Because in my understanding, the dumps have been done with the proper own systems BIOS. When you do the loading, there are other techniques as to detection, fully recognizing these attacks. Normally, I don't use detection techniques because I have so many, I have so few attacks that, okay, if I infect the BIOS or the Wi-Fi, what I'm going to do is to check that nobody's trying to infect my Wi-Fi, not to be pissed off. Here is more a concept trial. Regarding SMND, we didn't show the binary to be ripped off. I tried that. The governments protect their binary, but in the public light, only trials of concepts have been published. But the malicious code, if it's revamped, can give you a correct image of the BIOS as to not detect what's going on. As far as I know, no. But it is something normal to happen. Because as of today, somebody executing a forensic analysis of a machine, I think this person will not check the BIOS at all. Nobody dumps the BIOS. When we are conducting forensic analysis, I imagine that this will be protected in case as necessary. And let's see what's happening. As of today, I didn't see nothing this way. I hope there will be in the future. Another question, what tools open tools to dump the BIOS hardware and put it back on the ship. Copernicus, Dimitri, which makes to do dump regarding Windows from UEFI. Physically is about welding the sheet from the plate and trying to revert it. There are not tools per se. Universal Bus is a tool which makes dump up ships. Computer Club attacks from last January. There is a very interesting video, this video in the talk, where he shows how he did the dump of the hardware. He connected to all the pins. He did a dump, and then he did inverse engineering and do the work on it. There are people doing this on a Mac case. In cases where you cannot conduct the Mac, you have to do it physically by connecting to the hardware. The video shows this very well. Thank you very much.
¿Alguna pregunta más?
Should you have any more questions, please raise your hands. Thank you. Thank you, David. There seems to be a question over there. Good morning. I heard you mention the possibility that code could be executable to levels like -1, -2. Particularly, I was surprised to see when you said that it can be modified, the code contained in the extensions UMX. I would like to, can you elaborate on this? My understanding is our areas in the CPU are not accessible from the user's layers for reasons that we know is this restricted access. Can you elaborate on this, please? Of course. Windows 95, 98, it was accessible for users. Then you need to be an administrator to do. But all the attacks, SMM, they have interruptions SMI where you can execute code of SMM. They try to supplant the code you are trying to eliminate, because the SMI you're trying to execute when the CPU is very hot, when your computer does not work, that you are out of battery. These are critical things for the operating system. They have to do supplantations, fake things. They execute code which is not the code which should be executed, and they make the CPU distracted. They supplant the routine, the interruption through the ports SMI for us to execute the code we want. I saw it on SMM. Other attacks use the introductions SMI ports to execute the code you want to. How can you put code there because it's a protected area? By seeing the interflows, vulnerabilities and failures. They are not normal failures. In principle, you should not be able to access these things from them. Thank you. Now, without further ado, let's move on to the next thing. David, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation.